Thank you very much. I guess I'm batting cleanup, and I appreciate the endurance of our secretary. I know he has hard days, long days, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to question him. I really want to pick up on some of the line of questions that Senator Portman asked. It is important what presidents say, and you and I come from that school, I imagine, where you have Ronald Reagan's clear, unwavering commitment to standing strong against then the Soviet Union. You saw it in the next George Bush. You've seen it in presidents. And so here's a clear statement of fact that the president tweeted out. I'm concerned that Russia will be fighting very hard to have an impact on the upcoming election, which is consistent with intelligence communities that they're continuing to attack. Of course, he said, based on the fact that no president has been tougher on Russia than me, they will be pushing very hard for the Democrats. They definitely don't want Trump. They don't want Trump. Now that obviously was surprising to see, given that we just heard from Vladimir Putin that he prefers Trump. But I'm concerned that the president doesn't understand that this ongoing threat is happening. When he came out of his secret meeting with Putin that was shrouded in secrecy, he said our relationship has never been worse until it is now, because that's changed as of about 4 hours ago. Has anything changed in the Russians' attacks or ongoing threats to our 2018 elections?
Senator, what I believe the president was referring to there, and obviously he speaks for himself in that sense, but what I understood him to say was that he'd had, for the first time in his administration, he'd had a chance to have an extensive, candid conversation with the leader of Russia, lay out and articulate America's interests to him so that he understood unambiguously what those interests were, and to in turn hear from Vladimir Putin about the things that he thought mattered most to Russia. So when I heard him say things have changed, I think that's what he was referring to. It was the first time they had met before, but it was the first time.
Mr. Secretary, I've got limited time. So I agree with Senator Rubio. There's got to be a cost to people when they attack the United States. Not just attacking the United States. They've assassinated people on British soil. They're threatening our allies. They're intervening in Western democracies, annexing Crimea, ongoing hostilities in the Donbass region of Ukraine. And we passed legislation here, the COTSA legislation, which you had an exchange with my colleague, Senator Cardin, about. And I think you said, this is the transcript that you said, thank you for presenting the law. We really appreciate it. We think it makes good sense. The president signed it as well. We've passed sanctions under the law, and we have passed it, but we haven't used all of the sanctions. Now, I was excited to see Nikki Haley come out and say that we were about to put on new sanctions. In fact, the RNC got talking points from the White House telling their pundits to say exactly what Nikki Haley said before the United Nations, that we were going to put on additional sanctions. But we haven't used those tools in our toolbox. They said that Nikki Haley was confused. She said, I'm sorry, I wasn't confused. This was a step that the White House was going to take. And so I hope you understand that there's many of us in a bipartisan manner that feels like we've put tools in the toolbox, but the president has shrunk from taking them and using those tools to stand strong against people that are ongoing attacks on the United States of America. Nikki Haley said, absolutely, you will see that Russian sanctions will be coming down. Secretary Mnuchin will be announcing those. It has already said that they're going to go directly to any sort of companies that are dealing with equipment related to in this case, Assad and chemical weapons use. So I'm having trouble, and again, I think I'm one of those people that agrees with some of my Republican colleagues that presidents should be allowed to meet with folks one-on-one, but this is, as far as my staff can find, the only meeting with anybody in the G20 that's been a one-on-one meeting without staff that hasn't been, the details of which haven't been disclosed. And it's particularly troubling given, as Senator Udall said, we have a long history of this administration having ties to the Russians. He read a list. Further, it's the Russian oligarch close to Putin who bought property for Trump at a significant profit. Whether it was Trump tweeting about his deals, whether it was Trump Jr. talking about Russians make up a disproportionate cross-section of our assets, whether it was Maria Butina, who's asking a question with Trump responding, I don't think we need more sanctions. I don't think we need sanctions. But this goes on. As Senator Coons just said, we have a president that right now sees that we have an ongoing investigation into the very attacks that the Russians did to us that have resulted in over 80 charges, over 30 people being charged, people in the administration, people in the campaign. And this is a president that is having private meetings with the Russians. Now, this is actually not the first private meeting that he had. I'm sure you remember that this president pulled aside at a G20 meeting and had a one-on-one discussion, unbeknownst to his staff, and had a conversation that he then said, when asked what they discussed, and I quote, he said, "We discussed adoptions." Now, adoptions is a code word, as we see, for sanctions. It's the same code word that was used to describe pre-election meetings between Kushner, Manafort, Don Jr., these ideas of adoptions. Now, you haven't asked, I've listened very closely, I'm the last person to ask questions, but you've refused to even say if relaxing sanctions, directly, if relaxing sanctions was part of the meeting that the president had. And so I find it hard to believe that we are a nation that is being under ongoing attack, and you can't come forward and say that this is a president that you say you represent, that we're standing strong against the person, but we're not. The very president who actually invited some of this here when he said, and I quote, "Russia, if you're listening, if you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing," he invited the very attacks that we're talking about. And so what I want, and what I think my colleagues want on both sides of the aisle, is to understand and believe that we're not having private discussions about relaxing sanctions, that we're showing the same kind of strength that past presidents have shown when enemies attack the United States of America. And you just committed to Senator Portman that you believe more sanctions are needed. And so are we to expect in the coming days that we will be applying the sanctions that the Senate has provided this president in a bipartisan way to hold Russia accountable and show them that there'll be a cost for their attacks on this nation?
Sir, I think this administration's record, over 200 sanctions, 200 sanctions, Senator, is reflective of this administration's steadfastness with respect to our willingness to push back against Russia. I think it's unquestioned. You just spoke for coming on 7 minutes about a whole litany of things political. Let me give you America's foreign policy.
Well, sir,
200 plus sanctions.
Clearly there's been divisions in the administration if Nikki Haley is talking about sanctions on one day and then you're not putting them on the next day.
Senator, there's vigorous debate in this administration on lots of things. There's no doubt about that. The president didn't hire a single shrinking violet, not one of us. And we often disagree about things. There's no doubt about that. And sometimes we prevail, and sometimes we don't. The president calls the ball, and the president called the ball over 200 times to sanction Russian entities. That's pretty strong.
The president is not using the tools of the United States Senate.
We've used CATSA. We've complied with CATSA. We will continue to comply with CATSA. I put this administration's work on sanctions against Russia. Let's just rack and stack.
Then I'll conclude.
For the last 8 years.
Mr. Chairman, I want to conclude with entering into the record the President of the United States statements on CATSA, and I will read them and put the whole statement in the record. This is what he said on the day CATSA was introduced. Since the bill was first introduced, I've expressed concerns to Congress about the many ways it improperly encroaches executive power, disadvantages our company, and hurts the interests of this nation. Still, the bill is seriously flawed, particularly because it encroaches on an executive branch's authority. Congress should not even negotiate a health care bill after 7 years. By limiting the executive ability's authority, this bill makes it harder for the United States to strike good deals.
I actually agree with each of the statements.
The framers of the Constitution put the foreign affairs. So, well, you didn't agree with it when you were talking to him. I could read your words back about how great this CATSA deal is. I put this in the record, and I finished my comments just simply by saying this is not a president that's using the tools. This is not a president strong against Russia. This is not a president that is standing up against people that are doing ongoing attacks on the United States of America that are continuing at this moment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Menendez.